Hello, everybody. This is just an introduction to get us started. We're going to wait maybe a minute or two more, well, maybe not more than that, for registrants to sign on. This is Bolaji Ojo, and I want to welcome those online already to the webinar, the panel discussion that we're hosting today on automation in cars, opportunities, promises, and fallacies. And we have a great team of experts on this topic. So we're just going to wait, if you don't mind, a couple of minutes, maybe not even up to a minute, not up to 2 minutes anymore before we get started. It's an interesting package, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion with the team that we have in place. Thank you for joining, and please be patient while we run up the numbers. I'm just going to give us 30 seconds more, and then we're going to get started. Again, if you're just joining us, this is the Ojo Yoshida report webinar on automation in cars, opportunities, promises, and fallacies. I think there's something for everybody on this call, and you'll be amazed at the people that have been put together to address this topic. We're looking forward to it. If we just give ourselves about 15 seconds more, just to have a few more people join us, and then we will get started. Thank you. All right, here we go. My name is Bolaji Ojo. I am the co-founder and the managing editor of the Ojo Yoshida report. It is an interesting publication born out of desire to connect all of the dots in the electronics industry to highlight, all of the factors that people work upon, going from the design all the way to how things are used and the impact on society as a whole. The role of regulators, the role of designers, the role of companies and enterprises, analysts, the financial community, how everything comes together in what we all do for a living. So this is why this particular panel that we've put together is very, very important. And like I said, we do have a great team in place to address this issue. The topic is automation in cars, opportunities, promises, and fallacies. First, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to just briefly talk about our sponsors. The first person I'm going to introduce is Colin Banden. He's a panelist. Actually, every single one of these people on this panel have been around for a while. They've been doing this for a while, so they've been all around the block. Colin is a principal analyst at Semicast Research. Colin, it's a pleasure always to have you. And then I'm going to go on to Phil Koopman. Phil Koopman is a safety expert, and by that I really do mean he's a safety expert. And in addition to that, he's an associate professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Phil, it's a pleasure to have you here. And the last person, well, not the last person, the third person is a long-time colleague of mine, a veteran journalist who's been covering and tracking the electronics industry for decades. In addition to that, she specializes in the autonomous vehicle, electric vehicle market. She's recognized as an authority in that area. Welcome, Junko Yoshida. She is a co-founder of the Ojo Yoshida report, and she is actually the top gun there in terms of being our editor-in-chief. So welcome everybody. The topic again, automation in cars, opportunities, promises, and fallacies. The way we want to run this is simply to have each one of our panelists address this topic from their own angle. Each one of them have a few minutes to address these. And then we'll go into some of the issues that need to be addressed. After that, it will be a pleasure to invite the participants online to send us their questions. Please click on the Q&A button at the bottom and send in your questions. We will try and get to as many of these questions as possible. If we cannot, we will also address these in the publication. Now, before we get started with Colin, I should say that this panel, this discussion is sponsored by Sane Machines, a company launched in 2000, in the year 2000, based in Australia, and they are big in all of these areas that we're talking about. They've kindly agreed to sponsor this particular session. So welcome everybody, those online and our panelists. Colin, you have the floor.
Thanks, Bola. Hello, everybody. So yes, I'm Colin Barndon, Principal Analyst, Semicast Research. And as I like to say to people, I have been around a while and I've seen some stuff. And another comment that I make a lot of the time is that differences of opinion about the future are almost always based on assumptions. So I'm quite sure that there'll be a lot of disagreement in places in this discussion, but it really comes down to the assumptions that people are making. So some of the issues that I see that are issues really for the market today around driving automation, the critical one really for me is the levels of driving automation as described in SAE standard J3016. And my position that they just don't represent what is actually happening in the market. You know, J3016 essentially is a roadmap to replace humans as drivers through increased levels of driving automation. That's exactly what the taxonomy of definitions covered in the standard is supposed to talk about. But it presupposes a trend in an industry towards increasing driving automation with a goal of replacing humans as drivers. And within that, what is completely lost is all of the technology opportunities, all of the technology trends, all of the chances for us as an industry to head towards Vision Zero by making human drivers into safer drivers. And if you read anything or listen to anything that I say, you will hear I'm a tremendous advocate of the roles of driver monitoring and driver assistance technology to keep the human driver alert, engaged, eyes on the road, mind on the task. If a driver is impaired, if they are asleep, if they are falling asleep, if they're looking at their cell phone, if they're looking away from the road, if they're doing non-driving related tasks, technology related to driving, driver monitoring can be used to bring the driver back into the driving loop. And J3016 and much of the discussion that we've seen in recent years mostly discounts all of the technology around driver aids and driver monitoring, and all of the opportunities to make human drivers into safer drivers is lost. So that's really one of the critical criticisms that I have about J3016 is it's not really looking at the opportunities to make human drivers safer. And the other real issue that I will flag up for this conversation that the other panelists can talk about or challenge me on is the role of complexity theory. And, you know, I talk about complexity theory in my writing. And just briefly, you know, a complex system, which is an example, public roads, is open. It's highly unpredictable. It will experience what's called emergent properties, which can lead to phase transitions. And very, very briefly, that is a transition from order to disorder and back to order again. And anybody who's ever driven on public roads for any period of time will have experienced situations where something just happens, something really weird just happens. And it can happen in an instant. And then a period of time later, it just disappears and all the traffic flow runs freely again. And it's within those phase transitions, within those emergent properties, that accidents, crashes, call them what you want, can happen. And that's where lives can be lost. But my position really is that artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, all of these sorts of technologies, which I call the machine driver, are currently too brittle to handle the unknown, extreme and unpredictable events that happen every day on public roads. So they're really the main issues that I see that I'd like us to discuss in this discussion today.
Thank you, Colin. I'd like to kind of jump to Junko here, but before doing that, I'd like to kind of recall something that Junko and I experienced a couple of years back. We were at a major conference dealing with this same type of issue. And I remember that everybody seemed to be in agreement that as far as AVs are concerned, 90% of everything that needed to be done had been done. But everybody is still struggling with 10%. it's that last mile. It's only, I would say it's only one of those items that Junko has pointed out in her writing over years. So I'm quite interested in what are the other issues that you see here, and where do you see the head of the industry?
Well, I have to jump in because this is a well-known industry thing, okay? The first 90% of the project takes 90% of the time. The last 10% takes the other 90% of the time, except in this case, I think it's the other 99% of the time.
That point well noted. You know, Junko, remember that they said that same 10% may actually take decades to solve. I'm not sure if that's your experience, but it's over to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, it's actually, let's start from where, you know, Phil and you left off, because I just had this this week, NVIDIA is holding their usual big GTC, you know, the GPU technology conference. And it has always been the kind of benchmark that how far AI technology has advanced so that we can move robocars onto the road. And what I found out this week is that actually robocars, not so much. It's already an old story. The NVIDIA CEO's focus is now ChatGPT. Okay, that's the next shiny thing. And what got me thinking is that actually one of the senior executives at NVIDIA said publicly, which I found very good, I mean, very honest. He said, fully autonomous vehicles are next decade's problem. And I'm glad that the industry is finally coming to the, you know, sort of ground level that this thing is really hard. You know, let's start from there. You know, don't pretend like we have solved the problem. But the issue that I want to bring up in this panel is that as a reporter covering this topic for a long time, I feel like I'm in a rabbit hole. You know, every time when I write stories, okay, is this vehicle is level 2, level 3, level 4, and try to, you know, not only myself understanding it, but trying to explain to readers, well, this vehicle, they say it's level 2, therefore this is what it does. But as it turns out, over the last 6 months, I have noticed that what the company claims as their vehicle's level doesn't mean a thing. You can trust no one, right? I mean, the Tesla, officially now starting February, I guess, they call the autopilot, the automation is level 2. Good, right? But then what's the thing behind it? Because, you know, FSD, for example, obviously design intent is level 4. So by voluntarily downgrading level from level 4 to level 2, they seem to be getting off the hook that their cars don't need to be regulated. So my question really to this panel is that who do we trust? What tools do we have to understand what is safe? That is a question I'd like to pose in this panel. Balaji, you're muted. Balaji, you're muted.
Right. Sorry, my apologies. Thanks so much, Junko. I think that's a topic I'd like to have Phil touch upon. And by the way, Phil is always interested in the role of the human driver. So Phil, you know, this is an interesting question I want to pose to you. In addition to the things you already lined up to talk about, are we trying to engineer the driver out, and why?
Now I'm gonna forget half the stuff I was gonna say. That's okay. All right. So remind me if I miss one. J3016. The levels in J3016 have no business being used for policy or regulations. None. I mean, it's a terminal, and it's not a safety standard. So I heard someone in Pennsylvania, I had a politician in Pennsylvania say, well, we conform to SAE safety standards because J3016. And fortunately, I was remote because I could have, you know, would not have been able to contain myself in person. It's not a safety standard. I'm on the voting committee. It's not a safety standard. Okay. It's just not. And the levels are wholly unsuitable for policy because they explicitly disclaim safety And if you're at any of the levels, there's a good, and you do what's at the level required, but not the optional things. Like driver monitoring is entirely optional. Okay, we know that's a bad idea for safety, right? And you know, for level 3, the handoff time is like, well, you know, 3 seconds is probably okay, right? No. But they didn't mean to write a safety standard, so we shouldn't use it as one, which means we should not be using it as the basis for regulation. All right, so that's the deal. SAE launched a campaign to get the policymakers to use 3016 levels for whatever reason they did, and that was just the wrong choice back then. And it's we got to roll that back, or we're never going to get anywhere. All right. That having been said, level 2 is so amorphous. And my big trend is that the industry is pivoting hard into level 2 plus, whatever that means, right? And the standard is just completely useless for describing those things. It just, you know, that's just not what it's going to be good at, let alone for policymakers. In terms of, I agree with Colin that it's a complex problem. And I guess the way I look at it is I'm willing to believe the industry can succeed. I'm willing to believe they can succeed more quickly if they put more billions of dollars in it, but I don't know what the scale is. I will point out, I've been working on self-driving car safety since the mid-1990s. So anyone who says it'll be solved next year, I'm pretty skeptical about, right? You know, and if that were really true, we would be seeing millions of miles with nothing to speak of going on, and that's just not what we're seeing yet. So that means they're not almost there. So I'm willing to believe that, but the other big thing I want to mention is that we've been attempting to regulate and set policy based on technology driven by 3016, which is a technology standard, and that has proved a spectacular failure. Our policy is terrible, right? The only well, we have two things. We have NHTSA doing, I call it whack-a-mole. With respect to NHTSA, it's whack-a-mole because their only way to handle this right now is reactive. And the car companies can OTA new features faster than they can investigate. So they're stuck in a game of whack-a-mole, not of their making, right? And that's good, but it only goes so far, right? And that's it. You know, that's what we got. We need to do something better because there's just all sorts of crazy stuff happening on the roads. So my latest thing is I think that looking at liability as the regulatory mechanism is our best medium to short-term plan to get some sanity out on the roads, to incentivize companies to behave a little more responsibly, those that aren't. And sadly, those that are get tarred with the same brush. But if you don't set a level playing field, the ones who are irresponsible get a competitive advantage, pushing everyone else to be irresponsible. And it's a very tough situation. I think state liability laws at the state level are something we've just got to do before the extinction level event of the industry puts them all out of business, right? You know, we're one wrong crash away for this whole thing coming down, and we need to do something about that.
Let's get back to some basics here. I'm going to toss this to Colin. You know, this is a question of definitions. So, Phil has talked about all of these levels and, you know, what's acceptable, what's real, what's not real. But let's go back and say, okay, what is assisted driving? What is automated? What is autonomous? You know, let's just put some flaw under this. You know, what are those three terms and where and when do they apply? And if they apply, where?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bola, and it's such a simple answer. Let's throw J3016 in the trash can. Let's just erase it from history. There's three terms. My preference for alliteration leads to this. So, as you've already mentioned, assisted driving. You know, these are driver aids. And, you know, I describe this really as technology which is active for maybe between 1 to 3 seconds. So we're talking about automatic emergency braking, forward collision warning, lane departure warning, lane keep assistance, those sorts of things that they provide assistance in the longitudinal and lateral direction. And we know everything about all of these technologies. They've been in the market for 20 years in some cases, and that's well understood. So driver aids, assisted driving is the first category that I would define. The second one, automated driving. And that is long duration, longitudinal speed control and lateral lane support, lane centering. And again, these technologies are just starting to appear in the market now. So examples here are GM Super Cruise, Ford Blue Cruise, Tesla's autopilot or full self-driving would fall into this category. So would anything that's UN regulation 157 for automated lane keeping systems. So again, we can neatly define what is automated driving as it's really long duration speed and lane centering. And then the third one is autonomous, and that's where the machine driver is completely liable, is completely in control. The human is essentially a passenger. And they are removed from the driving task. They're not responsible for the driving task. They're not liable for the driving task. They're not involved in any way. And that's the robo-car, robo-driver, robo-taxi, robo-truck sort of technologies that are being talked about now. So if we just simply go to assisted, automated, and autonomous, it starts to become much easier to see some of the things. For example, a vehicle can be assisted under certain conditions and it can be automated under other conditions. Whereas this sort of notion in, you know, like, well, if a vehicle's level 4, then it's level 4, but like, well, it could be level 2 at other times, and all of that stuff, it just goes out the window. So assisted, automated, autonomous is the direction I would say the industry would probably benefit from going in.
Well, which one is everybody determined to achieve right now, Junko? Autonomous?
Well, it's actually, before we say one way or the other, actually, I want to ask questions to Phil, because Phil has a different way of looking at the same problem.
Okay.
Why don't you explain, Phil, what's your category that
Sure. I use different names than Colin. That's an interesting arm wrestling discussion. But I'm assisted. I'm good with assisted. I use supervised instead of automated because supervisory is more driver centric, even though it doesn't start with the letter A. And autonomous. I'm okay with autonomous. Now, there's a fourth category that I think urgently needs to be there, not from a driving public point of view, but from a policy point of view, which is testing. Because even though an automated versus testing vehicle looks the same if you're looking at there's a driver who's supposed to be paying attention, and one of them, it's an ordinary driver driving a well-behaved car, and the other one is a highly skilled trained driver, or should be, with a car that's going to try and kill them on a regular basis, right? And other people on the road. And so you really need a separate category for testing because you don't want civilians doing testing. It's just a bad idea, right? So I want to add a fourth category of testing for not disagreeing with Colin. It's just that one matters. And J3016 says almost nothing about testing. And that's how you see companies claiming that level 2 and testing are the same. They're not even close to the same. So that's the first one. That should be separate. So in general, I agree with the 3 bins. We can have, automated versus supervisory, but that's fine. The thing that's important, again, I got my policy hat on today. I was looking at fully automated cars or autonomous cars for so long. This year, I'm looking more at the shared responsibility cars. And what I've been working on is, how do you tell the difference? So it turns out there's a fallacy. People think that a level 2, something with automated steering and automated speed control, is a driver assistance. That's not true. Level 2 is not ADAS. Go look in the standard. It doesn't say it's ADAS. And all the studies that say ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, are safer, exclude automated steering. So people are trying to say automated steering is ADAS, therefore it's safer because studies. And I've seen this on social media a bunch of times. Every time you pull it apart, the study they're referencing doesn't include automated steering. And automated steering is not ADAS, all right? So I put it simply that if the human is steering, then I'm going to make the rule simple. If the human's steering, it's an assisted vehicle. That's it. We're done. It's driver assistance if they're steering. If they're not steering, it's automated supervisory. Because in the driver role fundamentally changes. When you're watching the car steer versus steering yourself, you're going to drop out of the loop, and it's a completely different cognitive task. Now, if your hands are on the wheel, if you got hands on the wheel or fingers on the wheel, it doesn't matter, because I have a car that steers itself even though I keep my hands on the wheel because I just don't trust it that much, but almost every curve, I'm actually nudging it to a different line through the curve than it wants. So I'm going to say I'm steering. But if you're sitting there and the steering wheel is doing its thing and you're just putting your finger on it so it doesn't complain at you, You're not steering. That's a completely different cognitive task. And in my mind, we really need to draw that bright line, whether the person's steering or not. That's got to be the line. There are other things you hear about eyes on the road and hands on, hands off, all these other things. But those are indicia of whether you're steering. And steering is the fundamental thing, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. Phil, you use the terminology in just what you just said. It's the shared responsibility vehicles,
Yeah.
right? And that is the crux of the issue, because a lot of times humans and machines, they don't really understand who is sharing what at what point, right? And so this thing, to me, it's a crux of the issue.
Well, the whole autonomous washing thing, people say, oh yeah, my car drives itself so I can drink and have it drive me home afterwards. Or I had a lawyer ask me, and no disrespect to the lawyer, because this is indicative of what's going on in the real world. He said, I've got a client who has a lot of DUI convictions. And what I want to do is get him to buy a car that self-drives so he can use it to come home and be safer. And I had to explain to him, no, these cars do not actually drive themselves. You cannot ensure safety if you're drunk. And he's a smart guy, but he just didn't get it because the public messaging has been so bad about this.
When you say, Phil, that the car doesn't drive itself, there are folks out there who believes robo-taxis are already in existence. They're doing something.
To be clear, this is a retail car that now is said to be at level 2. Okay, there are robo taxis, not in the city this gentleman was from, right? Because they wanted to buy him a car, right? There are robo taxis that drive themselves mostly, except for the weird stuff that's going on the roads, right? They're mostly there. And in principle, if you were drunk and got into one of those, you're not responsible for driving the vehicle. But we were talking about purchasing a retail car that didn't have those capabilities.
Right. So here's one thing I'd like us to go back to. What's our topic? It's automation in cars, opportunities, promises, fallacies. Okay. So, Colin, what are the promises? What are the promises that we can look at here? Because we can end up just talking about how it's not going to happen, but are there really opportunities? I mean, promises first. Let's deal with the promises.
I mean, let's take the most egregious example now, which is Mercedes Drive Pilot, where you can take your eyes off the road and you can do something else. Oh, but you've got to be ready to take over in an instant. I mean, just how stupid is this? I mean, how dangerous is this? I mean, how offensive is that message to the message of Vision Zero and road safety? I just don't understand why Mercedes are going with that language of you can take your eyes off the road and you can do something else while Drive Pilot is activated and we'll take care of it and we'll do everything within the operational design domain. These messages are really dangerous, and this comes back to my point. Roads are complex, not complicated. So Mercedes can say, oh, we'll give you a 10-second warning of handover, and anybody who's watching, from your own experience, have you ever found yourself in a life-critical, mission-critical situation on the roads that just happens immediately? I have. And that can happen within the operational design domain. Let's say divided highways in Nevada, if Mercedes want to operate Drive Pilot in Nevada, and they're saying that. And are they essentially saying, oh, well, we've solved problems on divided highways in the state of Nevada because reasons. So this is one of the most offensive promises that's starting to be made now, is that drivers can take their eyes off the road and look away and do something else. But then they are required, should anything happen instantaneously, they're then required to take back the driving task and respond instantaneously. And humans will have lost situational awareness. They will have lost attention to what's going on around them. They won't necessarily know what path they can take to exit the situation safely, because that's what they've been told that they can do, that they can tune out, and it's just dangerous. So I'll stop there and hand over to Junko.
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to add to what Colin said. When it comes to promises I hear most often by car makers in the last few months is we'll drive. Our car is, has these automated features. We will drive for you, and we will give you back the time. That is the message that I hear. So, take back your time. I don't want to take back my time. That is the really most egregious, the tagline that they have come up with. And everybody's using that now. You go to every conference, people say, oh no, well, you can take back your time. That's the promise, though. That's the promise automotive industry is making when they start pitching hands-free driving, not just on highway, but including cities.
So I'll say that I hear both of you. I'm going to be a little less negative and a little more nuanced, but a little more nuanced. Okay. That if a car company, I mean, we all know who we're talking about, but I'm going to make it general because it applies to all car companies. If a car company wants to say it's okay to take your eyes off the road, there is the certainty that some fraction of people will have a lot of trouble getting their eyes back on the road. We all know people that I'm not going to name names. We all know people that once they get absorbed, they can carry on entire conversations and not recall the conversation later. It's almost like they're sleep talking, right? And once they're absorbed, you're not going to get their focus in anything less than a minute or two, right? It's just the way it's going to be. And some people are just wired that way. And some people are going to go to sleep and whatever. Okay. So once you allow the driver to take their full attention off the road, you're going to have a probability distribution function of how long it takes to come back. And 3 seconds is not going to be anywhere near the median, right? Now, there are some people who are going to pay attention and some people are not. There's going to be a range. So if you say, as Mercedes has said, well, if they don't pay attention, we'll do something safe, okay? That argument is an argument I've actually tried to make for a long time, that it's okay to say you can take your attention back and take it off the road and we'll put it back on. And you can take safety credit for the fact that some percent will immediately do, but you can't blame the others for not doing it. The thing is, you can't blame them for not putting back. You can take credit if they do, because statistically, you'll get the human subject data and you'll figure it out, right? And there'll be some fraction that never come back in any reasonable time, and you have to design for that. So if you want to design a system that is safe enough if half the people pay immediate attention and you have data saying half enough pay attention, I'm okay with that, right? But you have to take responsibility for the outcome. And the telling thing with the Mercedes in Nevada was, Junko, I think you're the one who asked them. We gave Junko a bell on a ribbon and said, go find the cat, tie this around, right? It's like, and they wouldn't say that it was their fault if there's a crash. And that's the problem.
Yeah, and that question of liability is one that runs across the industry. I mean, who's finally responsible for any of this? Junko, from your reporting and interviews so far, has anybody stepped up to say, look, we'll accept responsibility, whatever happens, 100%?
Well, many moons ago, when autonomous vehicles are still new, a few companies step up and said, if something happens with our autonomous vehicles, we'll be taking full responsibilities. But that is like, I don't know, Colin, how many years ago was that? It's like nobody's saying that anymore, as far as I could tell. What do you know, Colin?
So this is interesting. So essentially, when it's in a press release, the OEM is taking liability. The moment that a journalist starts asking serious questions about what's actually going to be the outcome here, the answer is it depends. And we all know that liability in a court will be whoever's got the smallest legal representation. Whoever's got the biggest budget is the one that can dump liability. So as far as I'm concerned, if you own it, lease it, or rent it, you are liable for it. That is what is going to be true about the automation, is that basically whoever owns the vehicle, is renting the vehicle or leasing the vehicle, they're going to be liable for whatever that technology in that vehicle does. And that's just simply the way that it's going to go.
But we don't get to decide that on this panel. Who gets to decide that, Phil? And is anybody even moving in that direction?
Well, the states are moving in the direction of calling the computer the driver, so you can throw it in jail if it kills someone from reckless driving. They're going the absolutely the wrong direction. The automated vehicle industry, the AV industry, is doing a state-by-state barnstorming campaign to get favorable state laws passed. They've been through Pennsylvania, they've been through a bunch of other states, and the laws are it's everyone's fault but theirs because jobs and economic growth, and that's what it boils down to. And they're also preventing cities from having a say. So Pittsburgh doesn't get a vote in whether those vehicles get tested here. We're not allowed to do anything about it. That's up at the state. And that's similar to what's happening in a lot of states.
Are there any differences when it comes to ADAS in terms of liability?
Oh, for ADAS, there are no rules.
Oh, Junko, is that
There are no
your
rules.
finding?
No, there's no rules.
There's no rules.
But, I think it's for the interest of our audience, Phil, I think it might be good to explain to, some of our audience may not from the United States. So
Yeah.
what is the responsibility of in the United States? What's the responsibility of state regulators and what is the responsibility of federal regulators like NHTSA? Can you explain that for us?
I can give it a try. Okay. So in the US, there is no homologation. There is no type approval. Companies self-certify, but what they self-certify to is a very basic set of safety features from FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, which have to do with, are your headlights bright enough? Does the warning indicator come on when your tires are low pressure? Crash safety, do your seat belts pass a certain standard? Those kind of, does your windows defrost? It's all very vehicle test level. And if it worked once, you're good to go. No notion of non-reproducible software faults. Computer and software safety simply does not enter into it. That's not regulated at all, other than after the fact recalls after there's already been a bunch of bad things happening. The states control the drivers, the feds control the machinery, and it's complicated because if you have machine driving, who controls it? And they're still trying to figure that out. The feds have no regulations other than the ability to recall. And they have a standing general order to report data, which is great, which, by the way, includes level 2, which is good to see that they're looking at regulating level 2. But right now, all that happens is that a bunch of really bad things happen, all involved, in some cluster that can identify, you may see a recall, and you've seen some of those happen. But that's after the fact. The companies can put anything they want on the road. And the state permits, even the most rigorous state permits, don't really attempt to assess the safety. They just say, do you have insurance? If you're testing, do you have safety drivers that work for you or something? That's on a good day. On a bad day, it's just, the state police like what you're doing, and the state police have, and there's no reason they should have skills to assess the technology. That's just crazy, right? And so basically, it's anything goes. And the industry is playing fear of missing out. Well, if your state doesn't do it, we'll go to another state. And if all the states don't do it, we'll go to China. They're playing all these things. But the rules are basically do whatever you get some insurance, do whatever you want. In some states, the insurance is the same as for human drivers. So states where it's a 50K policy, you can test this stuff as long as you've had a safety driver for a while and haven't had a big crash in the news, you're good to go. It's about where we are.
Okay.
So when I say there's no rules, I'm exaggerating only about this much. Okay.
Well, okay. So one thing that's going on now is that you guys are really staring the honest names, because our participants are registered, folks on the line, they're really raising some important questions as you talk about some of these issues. So let me pull one up very quickly so you get where they're headed. They're asking, okay, there's the FAA. And they do a great job, also we think. Is there the possibility, any way that you could have a federal agency?
Well, we got NHTSA. We got NHTSA. They're peer to the FAA, right?
What's your assessment of them then?
They're at the same place in the organizational chart in DOT as FAA, right? They're peers. But the auto industry has fought hard for self-certification, and they're not going to let go of that.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be a chance to break this cycle of self-certification then?
Well, to be clear, the FAA is involved in the design process, and NHTSA is not. That's the big difference. They don't get a say in the design process. They don't get they don't do a type approval. They don't do any of that stuff. That could change, but that would take a dramatic change at DOT. I imagine, this is not my expertise. I imagine this is an act of Congress, right? And we're seeing, by the way, there is a congressional act floating around that just surfaced in the last week or so, but all its things are like 8 and 10 years out. okay, fine, but what do we do for 8 or 10 years?
What's it like across the pond, Colin, then?
Well, they have type approval, right? Colin, are you more up to speed on this? Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Essentially, in Europe, well, as Phil says, we've got type approval, so it's kind of like it's exactly the other way around. So unless you meet the regulations for putting a vehicle on the road, it's not legal to put a vehicle on the road. So there's no self-certification. There's no, oh, we'll have some experimental technology here. So some of Tesla's autopilot, I think they're getting around the fact that the system isn't exactly meeting the regulations by saying that it's a hands-on driving system, when quite clearly the wheel turns by somebody taking the hands off the wheel. But I guess that's the way that they presented it, and that's some clever marketing and a great way to find a loophole. But generally speaking, Europe is kind of the inverse of the United States, such that you have to show that you meet type approval in order to get the authorization to put a new vehicle or a new technology onto the roads.
I'm going to be coming back to you almost immediately, Colin, because of Mercedes. But I want to kind of touch base with Junko about, because I know she's tracked BMW, she's tracked most of these companies, and I wonder, are there different approaches amongst these companies, these car makers?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's their standard answers. I think somebody mentioned in the panel is that if you ask them hard questions, it depends. They're not going to answer the questions. When push comes to shove, who's going to be responsible? We're not going to go anywhere. No companies that I've spoken to would give us straight answers. Period.
I'm aware, Junko, that you've covered this industry, and you actually started at a point with Toyota where the answers or the no answers actually came in the courtroom. Is that where these things will be resolved?
Well, this is good. Phil and I have been kind of involved in the Toyota case for a long time, but that was the one case that taught me a lot of lessons. And I'd like to, come back to that because I realized while I was covering it was a long time ago, but while I was covering it, I said, plaintiffs have no chance to win any of those cases, because the plaintiffs don't have, don't have enough expertise. They don't have technical knowledge. They don't have a lot of money that big car companies can actually spend in lawyers and technical the technology witness or whatever. I mean, it's like, so it's like a lose-lose situation. That was back in Toyota's unintended acceleration case. Things are a lot more complex now. And I can't fathom what problems, what troubles the consumers will actually get into now, because so much software, so much, AI, so much new technology is coming in and nobody's watching.
Well, I'll tell you how bad it is. If you're in a car crash and the car has automated driving capabilities, there is no way for you to know as a victim whether the automation was turned on or not.
Sure.
Right? You have to ask the company, and they may or may not get around to telling you, right? And so you have to spend a ton of money just to find out if the automation was involved, to find out how the case should go. And that's just ridiculous. The playing field is supposed to be level. And I respect Colin's comment about whoever has the most money to spend on lawyers has an advantage. But you should at least have a level playing field, as opposed to, even if you have the same money you spend on lawyers, you can't get the info. What are you supposed to do with that, right?
For you, Colin, you brought up Mercedes a short while back, and there are folks on this call that are wondering, is there anything that's actually safe in Mercedes' approach, or is it just all, you just have to dump everything?
I can't see how anybody can safely take their eyes off the road on public roads, and the word there is safe. So if we look at other types of systems, complicated systems, rail, aviation, they are closed, they're highly predictable, you can model them perfectly, precisely, because you understand everything and there's like a central controller. So the central essence is that public roads are different from practically every other mode of transportation in that they are complex, not complicated. So my professional opinion is no. And I don't understand why there are big companies, automakers, OEMs, that are saying, hey, you can do whatever you like. You can take your eyes off the road. Just be ready to take over at a moment's notice. When common sense tells us that is a really, and decades of human factors research tells us that that's just not sensible. And yet the car companies seem to be coming along and gaslighting us to the fact that, like, hey, you can do whatever you like, but just be ready at a moment's notice to take back control again. And humans just don't work like that. I mean, and essentially what we've really ended up with is the worst model possible, that we've got a machine driver with a human supervisor, and the machine driver is brittle and can't cope with uncertain and extreme events. And the human supervisor, who after a period of time, and it's probably a short of about 7 seconds, just tunes out of the task of supervising and is thinking about other things. As Missy Cummings at George Mason University has been saying a lot recently, the moment you've got hands off, most people take that as mind off. And the moment that somebody's tuned out of the supervision task, they're no longer there to effectively act as the supervisor. So in my position, there's nothing about Drive Pilot that Mercedes are talking about that's safe. If they kept their eyes on the road, fine, but they're saying take your eyes off and do something else.
Let me add in that really briefly that so everything Colin said, we should be designing systems that assist the driver instead of having the driver assist the computer, right? That we got that backwards. But the other issue, on top of everything Colin said, the thing that machine learning is worst about is it has false confidence. And you mentioned Chat GPT earlier, Balaji.
Right.
Chat GPT is like the world's best bullshit artist, right? And I'm not saying they're the same. For sure, they're not the same. But this technology is supremely confident because it just says it's a yes no question, right? And so its biggest weakness is not knowing when it's encountering something that it should consider novel. It's not good at what the heck is that. And a lot of human driver safety comes from what the heck is that? I'm going to slow down because I don't know. And subtle things like, is that a painting of a person or is it a person? I'm not sure, I'm going to slow down, as opposed to, oh, it's clearly a paint, whatever. And so not only are we inverting the smart approach of having the computer assist the person instead of the other way around, when we take eyes off the road, you're implicitly trusting the computer to always know when to ask for help. And the thing they're worst at is knowing when to ask for help. So that's why it's so challenging in my mind.
Maybe, Junko, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but this whole gap between the standards that we may want to set. Somebody on our panel just talked about J301 that it seems to have done a great job. I'm quoting now, of highlighting the need for handoff standards, driver monitoring standards, standards associated with minimum situational awareness, and the need for humans to take over. But what you've just described is a situation where it's really almost impossible for that transfer to take place. So the question that they're asking is, are these standards going to be able to resolve some of these issues between the machine and the human driver?
I think it's very hard because we just simply don't know what machine is able to do it. And machine certainly doesn't know what I'm capable of doing. That's the problem. It has to be two-way streets, right? I mean, machine needs to know what situation that I'm in. And also, I need to be able to trust machines can actually, take things over from me, right? And so that two-way trust, whatever the standard says, that transfer, not just from machine to human, but human to machine, as actually Phil said, he doesn't trust the machine, so he always has his hands on the wheel because he doesn't trust the car steering all the time, right? So it's that trust it's not what the standard says. That trust needs to be proven and presented to the consumers. This is why. Here are the examples. Here's the data set. This is why we think both machine and humans can talk to each other.
I'm sorry to go back to this, Colin. It's because you mentioned a company that a lot of people are passionate about. And I think this whole issue of this handover and standards and government rules and regulations keeps coming up. There is somebody who's asking here and saying, well, there's a German law allowing L3 on the road, right? But you still have concerns about Mercedes L3 vehicles. You know, are we missing something between the government rules and what's happening on the road?
I'm going to channel Phil here. J3016 is not a safety standard. So I don't care what level a drive pilot is. It's not safe. You know, let me just state something really, really simple. The safest driver is an alert, engaged, and unimpaired human who has their hands on the wheel, their eyes on the road, and their mind on the task of driving. Please, industry, can we come back to that? Can we start there? So can we get the best, most sophisticated, competent driver monitoring system installed into everything? It's covered in Europe under the general safety regulations, not in the US. Let's call it super AEB, some technology that when something happens in front of the vehicle, you can stop the vehicle faster than a human can react. Let's have a situation where the automotive industry is spending its billions of dollars, not on technology, which is blatantly unsafe, but on technology which is monitoring the human driver for distraction, fatigue, and impairment, and with technology which can look ahead and see what's going on ahead. And if there is a clear collision situation, can stop the vehicle or at least mitigate some of the speed of the impact to mitigate the effects of the crash. Why don't we start there rather than this complete gaslighting about eyes off driving being safe? Let's come back to making human drivers safer drivers. If we're really keen about pursuing Vision Zero, let's focus on making human drivers safer rather than this rubbish about trying to replace humans as drivers and whether or not eyes off driving is safe or not.
So, Bola, to get to your standards question, it's since I've been involved in standards, it turns out there's no point writing a standard until you have a concept that's actually going to work. And what we need is a human-computer concept that does better than blaming the human for being human, an imperfect human when something goes wrong. We need to do better than that before it's worthwhile writing a standard.
Just this week, Junko and I had a podcast with somebody who's actually spent some time.
Brian Reamer.
Right.
I listened to that this morning. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. It was a good podcast. Everyone should listen to that.
So he's been monitoring the driver behind this. He's been monitoring drivers behind the steering. And so there's a connection between that monitoring and the kind of information that automakers have actually been able to share or been compelled to share or have even shared at all. So one of our participants here is asking, you know, is there a way to force or compel or ask automakers to share certain information that they are obviously collecting, unless they are not collecting anything at all?
Well, they're not happy sharing info. The good news is that Brian's work has multiple car companies and is coming up with pooled results. So that's really promising. I love the fact that they're doing this and they're asking the right questions, which is, if you have a human plus a car, how do you make the pair safe? So I love to see that work. But forcing them to share the info to people who aren't contributing is going to be a problem. Forcing car companies to share any info about anything is going to be a problem. And so that's why I keep coming back to liability as at least an incentive mechanism for them to come up with that, however they come up with, but at least deploy something reasonable instead of the stuff we've been seeing.
Okay, Junko, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no, actually somebody came up to me during the conference last week, and why can't we promote the idea of sharing data among companies? And the truth is that, everybody says that everybody says that, oh yeah, we're collecting a lot of data. We have the test cars here and there. But the truth is, well, I don't know if it is true or not, but what some of the things that I heard is that not everybody's labeling all the data they have collected. And that's like the first step. Really? I mean, you are claiming that you're collecting so much data, but you're not even labeling. So what are you going to do about that? Is there any shared repository of some of the data that each different car company has collected? That's a very utopian view. I didn't want to shut him down right on the spot and said, that's really hard. As far as I could tell that, the ABT is a little different though, because they put their money in and they actually, their motivation is that, okay, let's figure out, whatever data we collected within this testing, the naturalistic testing, let's share that data among ourselves. I think something like that, more voluntary based, and people, they bring their money in, that's very workable, I think.
What about the consumer? What about the car driver? Would they like to share that kind of information, knowing the exposure that they may be committing to themselves to?
But it's not like they're singling out, Bola, you're a really terrible driver. We're going to tweet about this, right? I mean, it's like, it's saying, well, you're one of the anonymized data. So it's, I don't think that people should be overly sensitive about that. Maybe some other people have different ideas.
Although if there's a crash and the data is there, you may be opened up for people finding out you did something bad that contributed to crash. So that's a concern.
Yeah,
right.
That's true. Yeah,
it's always complicated. Those things are always complicated.
Yeah.
Now I have to now kind of pull us back to the topic here, opportunities. I'm really fascinated by the concept that even when you have the kind of negative situation that we've discussed, we're trying to move in a particular direction. So there must be opportunities here. What are those opportunities? I'd like the three of you to actually chime in. I want to hear from you what you see as potential opportunities for car makers, for subsystem, for tier one companies, for everybody. Are there opportunities here in automation? Or is it just more than fallacies?
I'll go first because I have a very sort of a utopian view of how things should be. I just wrote about it last week. I'd like to. This is the opportunity here is for car makers to design a car that really understand me as a driver. And this is it's sort of like automation is now shoved into me. I want to shove it back. I want to create an opportunity for car companies to understand how I want to drive and how I drive, how, you guys can help me. I just want to sort of the turn the table around. That's the opportunities that I see in this automation discussion.
I'll come in with this, and what I'm going to quote Steve Jobs of Apple, what I call Steve's law, and he taught us that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and kind of like work out where you want to sell it. And really, the automakers for a long time now, they've been running around like kids in a candy store, like on a sugar rush of technology, talking about how many tops they've got on the processor, and what sensor suite they've got. And yet what really matters is what is the customer experience, what is the experience of using this technology in the cabin, in the car, to make a car safer.
Phil.
I think there are two opportunities. One, for cargo, I think there is an opportunity to be very smart about how you deploy automation for cargo, but it's not going to be just throw a big rig on the truck on the road with all the other traffic and hope it turns out well. You're going to have to do really smart things like pilot vehicles and convoys and all the, I've talked about that otherwise on a truck podcast, right? There are smart ways to deploy trucks, and saying, hey, there's a truck, let it do its thing is probably not the smart way to do it. So we're going to see how that all turns out. They say it's easier. That's just because they haven't found out all the problems that they know about for the city driving. It's not that easy. We're going to see how it goes. You can deploy it. You have to be very smart. For people, robo taxis is a cheap taxi. I mean, how did subsidized rideshare turn out for cities? It's hard to say that this is really a good thing in the near term, and the long term is going to be far away. So I really think the biggest opportunity for personal cars is what Junko said, which is making people have a better driving experience rather than stressing them out, trying to keep right herd on unruly technology, which we know people are really bad at.
Well, there is somebody who wants to take the conversation even beyond what you guys are talking about. He believes that we should be able to have the opportunity, or somebody should have the ability to control the cars remotely. You know, if the car is not behaving the way we want it to behave, you know, is there a way to kind of, work with our machines to monitor? And then if the car is not behaving right, then, we have the technology to take control and redirect it. Is that complicating things?
So I pay top dollar for the best cell phone company coverage in Pittsburgh, the guys who are always at the top of the tower, right? And I'm on an outdoor walk talking to Junko, and I drop out every 5 minutes. Not going to work in Pittsburgh because we got hills. It's just not going to happen, right? But more seriously, anytime you're counting on radio frequency technology for life critical safety, you're asking for trouble. And so you have to have a car that's smart enough that if the link drops, that it's going to be 100% safe. And you're already solving 90% of the problem, right? And by the way, 3016 doesn't have a category for that. It amounts to manual driving, but automated fallback. That's not a thing in 3016, right? So maybe you could do that, but it's really, really hard. It sounds.
What I hear from you, Phil, is don't do it.
Well, some people will say it's just the wrong idea. I'm always going to say, here's what it takes to do it: is you have to have 100% foolproof fallback. And people say, we use 2 cell phone companies. Go look up a video of a cell phone tower on fire and note that each row of antennas is a different cell phone company. And ask me how that's going to work out if you're using 2 rows of antennas on the same burning cell tower. There's so many single points of failure in the infrastructure.
Now, this whole panel discussion has been recorded, and it will be available on demand on the Ojo Yoshida Report website, www.ojoyoshidareport.com. But before we go, the word fallacies. I'm intrigued also by that, as I have been by promises and opportunities. So I'm going to give you guys one quick chance to talk about the fallacies that you've seen. I know you've mentioned some of them, but please highlight one each. Fallacies that you see in automation.
I'll take a chance and go first. I mean, I have this dirty dozen list I published, right? But the number one is the pervasive assumption that computers will be better drivers than people. There's no basis for that whatsoever. It's all wishful thinking and rhetorical tricks. Maybe someday, no day soon, and for sure it's not a given. So please don't base policies on we're going to spend money or we're going to allow people to get hurt because we know cars will be better. You don't know that. Nobody knows that.
Phil.
I'm going to chime in.
Sorry, Colin, please.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in with is the greatest fallacy of all that consumers even want automated or autonomous driving. Has anybody asked consumers? Maybe they would just like a better experience in their car and a safer car.
Yeah, and I actually repeat that. The self-driving cars can drive better than humans. That is the biggest fallacy.
You guys have been awesome, and participants online, you have been wonderful. I would say probably 98% of the folks online have stayed true. I want to again thank Colin. I want to thank Phil. I want to thank my colleague, partner, and industry expert, Junko Yoshida. Also, I would like to thank Seeing Machines for being the sponsor of this panel. Seeing Machines is a company based in Australia that has a focus on what they call mission critical applications, basically some of the things that we've been talking about. So Seeing Machines designs, manufactures, and sells state-of-the-art software, hardware, and systems that are currently used, trusted, and incorporated across multiple industries globally. Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure having everybody on board.